All right, welcome back everybody, and we to another episode of Tech Transfer Insights, and we are going to ask Gemini this week to give us three more random items from this list. So let's see with what it comes up with. University of New Mexico, Colorado State, and Texas A&M. All right, so I will go find something, starting with the University of New Mexico. I'll be back in a second. Oh man, so this is gonna be an interesting one. I wanted to point out that actually New Mexico has an entire portfolio of space-based technologies, and normally that would be where my attention immediately goes. But this is literally the one that was on the top of the list as I was looking at this. So, Bowel Sense is a smart toilet attachment. Basically, it is a camera pointed away from the user of a toilet, but mounted on the inside of a toilet along with it sounds like some strain sensors to detect which potential user is using the toilet that can monitor things like IBS symptoms or irritable bowel syndrome symptoms, and it uses an AI model to meticulously analyze the consistency and color of the user's bowel movements, is what it literally says here. Believe it or not, I can see this being useful, although it is definitely not what I would have thought of as the first use case for an AI algorithm, but certainly makes sense. GI issues are a huge problem for a lot of people. It says IBS affects 3 million people in the US, and it's $13 billion market for the device, or gastrointestinal device market is $13 billion in a couple of years. Obviously, there's a demand for this. This just sounds rather impressive to me. So I'll say really interesting idea. Whether it can be tied to health outcomes, I think would be the big question. Whether people would accept this is another big question, but it's definitely one of the more memorable ideas I've seen in doing this. And very clearly, like technologically feasible, no problem at all. I can definitely see how that is a technologically feasible solution. And I can understand that it could potentially help solve problems associated with this, but probably going to be a pretty hard sell in terms of getting people to adopt it. But also, you know, what like diagnosing is one thing. If you can prove that this makes it more fluid or easier to diagnose things like IBS or IBD, then I think that could really be game changing. But they don't seem to have that quite uh, in this yet. But you know, you can integrate it with an existing toilet. I guess it's good to know. It has an app written already that has personalized data. I like how they note that it should be in private bathrooms rather than public ones. This is a really interesting idea. And honestly, again, very feasible technologically, uh, and can potentially help people. IBS, I'm sure, is not a fun experience for anybody. And if it can help people more closely monitor that and keep track of it, this could really be useful technology. So, with that one, I think next we are on to Colorado State. So I'll be back with that one in a second here. All right, this might be another sensor week. I guess we'll see. So, in looking at the Colorado State technologies, this one kind of stood out to me is I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and I know when I was growing up there were a lot of people that were really concerned about water contamination from the fracking that was going on near my hometown. So, getting a hydrocarbon sensor that can detect water contamination is a really interesting use case. So, this is a very generic looking tap, but benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylenes are some of the worst types of hydrocarbons that you would not want to drink ever, uh, just from a general understanding of their chemistry. So it sounds like this is a fancy type of chip scale sensor, a local evanescent array coupled. I've never heard of that, but you know, it's part of the reason why I do this is the new technologies, right? Can detect them at like in the hundreds of parts per billion range, which is pretty good in general. There's a couple of different limits down here, and it has a linear response, meaning you can scale it between 1 and 30 part per million, which is pretty good. There's some examples of sensitivity, uh, which is also very good because you don't want it to be tricked by, or specificity. That's actually what I would want to see in addition to this is specificity. The idea being, yeah, you can detect these. What if there are confounding factors in here that could affect it? It's one of the basic standard measurements of success for any sort of sensor. But overall, I don't know of anything that can do this, especially not anything that's cheap enough that can be used by like a household. And I think that a lot of people would feel a lot better with the ability to understand what, if any, hydrocarbons are present in their uh, drinking water if there is fracking going on nearby. So, interesting technology. Seems like it's relatively well developed. They definitely have some prototypes made, at least if you're doing sensitivity analysis. So the hydrocarbon sensing device for rapid water contamination detection from Colorado State is available for licensing and could both save some people actually, but also save their peace of mind when dealing with fracking or other extractive hydrocarbon activities near their houses. So next up, I believe we have Texas A&M, so I'll be back with that. All right, so it is officially a sensor week again. And again, I apologize because this is the stuff that I understand the most, but also I think sensors are one of the most interesting hardware technologies because of what it enables us to do. Because understanding the world and helping people really has a huge component of being able to recognize the world. So sensors are how machines do that, essentially. So I apologize if I'm biased a little bit towards them, but this one I thought was interesting again, coming from my own personal history. So I was a competitive runner for a very long time. And in high school, I had a teammate who had type 1 diabetes. And I remember he would test himself using a finger prick method for our races. And I always was like, man, that sucks. I feel terrible. You have to do that. So this immediately brought that to mind, where there's an obvious problem. I knew someone who had that problem personally very well. But basically, it is a non-invasive sensor to detect a hypo or hyper, so low or high glycemia, meaning blood sugar, in diabetic patients, especially around exercise. That can be a huge risk. You can literally have heart failure if you go hyperglycemic. You can die if you go hypoglycemic. So neither of those are good situations to be in, especially when you're exercising, but no one wants to have a needle stuck in them while they're doing so. And most direct diabetes monitoring systems require invasive needles, basically. Um, Not necessarily large needles, but still a needle. This sounds like it can do it non-invasively. So you basically wear a R-band, something equivalent to like where you would strap your phone while you're running. And it uses a series of different types of sensors and some fancy algorithms to detect hyper or hypoglycemia. There's not a whole lot of details about how much has been tested in this particular uh, disclosure, but it does say it's a TRL level 4, which is pretty good. That means they built it at least. And there's a couple of papers here that talk about it in some detail. Um, Basically, it's an interesting idea, and again, solves a very known problem for a lot of people. And if it does do what it says it does, and it can accurately track hypo or hyperglycemia, and especially if you can link that up with a phone or something else that most people would have when they're running, that could be an extraordinarily useful sensor. So I think that's it for this week. So we got three sensors this week from three very different universities. But for now, I think that'll be it. So if you are interested in licensing any of these, I will have links to all of these web pages down in the description. And you on here, you can normally find things like contact if you happen to be in Flintbox, or a lot of times they have the specific people here. So you could, for example, talk to Dr. Cote about, or from the biomedical engineering department at Texas A&M. Uh, but ultimately, if you are interested, feel free to reach out to these tech transfer departments. They will be happy to get you set up with a talk normally with one of these guys. And that's probably the first step you would want to have on the path to making these reality. So for right now, they're just all stuck in a lab until someone does something with them. So that's it for now. I'll be back next week. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks.